This case, ladies and gentlemen, is about one thing. Whether my client broke the law or not by driving intoxicated. We have a limited amount of facts that we can actually look at in this case. The major fact that we have is his blood alcohol level. The legal limit is a 0.08 grams. Paul Van Bibber's blood alcohol level was a 0.06. Judge O'Brien will tell you that we have to presume that the blood test done at the hospital, the result of that was the same as when Paul was pulled over. Now, Mr. Getz brings up a number of different things, but the way that I look at this case, it comes down to two separate issues. First, we need to look at what happens with the stop of my client. Why was he stopped? Well, Officer Swatala is going to tell you that he was lane straddling, that he was going over lanes and things like that. But I want each and every one of you to watch the videotape that we have. And in the short quarter mile that Officer Swatala follows my client, he never lane straddles. And you can watch that right on the tape. When you're watching the tape and you're watching my client being stopped, what we would say would be for no reason, when you're watching that tape, I want you to look and see how well he's driving. Not driving like somebody who's intoxicated, not driving like somebody who's impaired, but driving like somebody who's going to use his turn signal to turn into the gas station before Officer Swatala puts on her overhead lights. Now, once he's pulled over and stopped in the gas station, my client, he doesn't act rude. He doesn't act inconsiderate. He does everything he's supposed to do, and he's honest. He says, yes, I've had 4 drinks, officer. Yes, my license is suspended. He was not dishonest about that. He was very polite. He was not slurring his speech. He was doing what everybody would normally do. When you're pulled over, you try to do what the officer tells you to do. Well, he gets pulled out of the vehicle, and sobriety tests are done on him. Now, part of watching the tape, and you're going to be able to see all of this, or at least some of these sobriety tests, and the way that my client acts while he's being pulled over, I want you all to look and see how he acts. Is he acting like somebody who's intoxicated? Is he acting like somebody who's impaired? Now, is he swaying around? Is he stumbling over? Is he slurring his speech? Is he acting like somebody who looks like they're drunk? No. And the tape shows that. Now then we talk about sobriety tests. And it's something that you will learn, and if you haven't already seen it on Law & Order, that these are done all the time in almost every single drunk driving case. And I would like it for all of you to watch how my client performs on these sobriety tests. These are the tests that are supposed to determine whether somebody is impaired, intoxicated, or not intoxicated, and not impaired. The first test that he does is he does the heel-to-toe test. And unfortunately, although there's a videotape, conveniently enough, you can only see him doing the test for about 3 or 4 seconds. Now, you will hear testimony by Officer Swatala that he basically fails this test. Well, I want you to watch that test. And I want you, when you're watching, to watch Paul stand here for 40 seconds with his, and I'll back up so everybody can see this, with his right foot touching his heel, touching his left toe. And he does this for 40 seconds without even moving, without falling over, without slipping, without stumbling, without losing his balance. And he hasn't lost his balance at all, and you will see that. The evidence will show that. So somehow, my client, who goes from not doing anything that would indicate intoxication or impaired driving, all of a sudden, when he goes off the camera, as we will hear testimony, all of a sudden he fails the test. How does that happen? And yet, he does all the steps he's instructed to do. And somehow he fails, although you can't hear that on the tape. The next step, the next test that's done is the one-legged stand. And it sounds an awful lot like my client passes it, that he does all the things he's supposed to do. And we'll hear testimony about what you're supposed to do. And yet, Officer Swatala says he fails that one too. But we'll get into that. We'll get into what is accurate and not accurate in her report and what really happened. because we can hear it, and we can at least see some of it. And the next test that's done is called the gaze nystagmus test. And we can't see it. Now, this is a very complex test, and you'll hear all about it, but in reality, this test comes down to the one where you stick a pen up in front of somebody and you look at their eyeballs. We see this on TV all the time. What does it mean? Nobody really knows. I didn't even really know until I started doing this job what it really means. But we will let you know exactly what the officers and Officer Swatala was really looking for in this test. There are specific things that the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration teaches officers to do when they do a gaze nystagmus test. Unfortunately, Officer Swatala puts that my client fails this test. Conveniently, we cannot see this one done either, and for reasons that aren't contained within the factors that she's supposed to be looking at. So then my client is placed in the back of the patrol car where he does the alphabet test. And guess what? He does it fine. But through testimony, Officer Swatala is going to tell you that he spoke it deliberately. Like that's supposed to mean that he's intoxicated in some way. But you're going to hear testimony that she instructed him to speak deliberately because when you do the alphabet, he was instructed by Officer Swatala, and she'll testify to this, that you're not supposed to sing it. So when you don't sing the alphabet, you speak it deliberately. There was one more test. It was the count backwards test. Although we fully admit that Mr. Van Vipper continued to count. He wasn't slurring his speech. He wasn't missing numbers. He just continued to count. So that's what we have as far as the night of the stop. What you can see, what you can hear, and what we can sort of look at to understand what he looked like. Was he impaired or not? We've all seen people that are impaired, but I want every one of you to look at him and think about that. Think about all the things he's doing that would indicate his sobriety. Now, that's not just why we're here, though. What you've heard is that, for Mr. Getz, is that there's this thing called retrograde extrapolation. Okay? Because the facts don't work out for the people. Instead, what they're going to use is this pseudo-scientific formula that they're going to backdate what the blood alcohol should have been at the time of the stop. And Dr. Glynn will come in here and testify that, oh yeah, he was over the legal limit. Now, I've done my homework on this. And I know all the journals, and I've read everything. And I will cross-examine her on what retrograde extrapolation really is. And I want you to listen, ladies and gentlemen, when I'm asking her why the leading toxicologists in this field disagree with its accuracy. Leading toxicologists in this field all say that when you do retrograde extrapolation through what we call the Widmark theory, which is a scientist from the 1900s, early 1900s, who developed this theory, that there are many inaccuracies. And when you decide that you're going to basically guess, because that's what that is, because we presume that this is a .06 at the time of the stop, so we're guessing at this point. That when you make this guess, this educated guess, I guess you could say, that all these factors, you have to include all these factors when you make that determination. Now, Dr. Glynn